time to bring in our legal guys. Avery Friedman, he's a civil rights attorney and law professor. He's in Cleveland. And Richard Herman, a New York criminal defense attorney and law professor, is not in New York. He joins us via Skype from Honolulu, which is in my favorite state, Hawaii. What are you doing in Hawaii, by the way?
Hey, I'm doing research for CNN, Gary. You know what that's like.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Right. Good one.
It's a beautiful place, Richard. I want to ask you the first question. I understand that you spoke with the attorney for the plaintiffs on the Costa Concordia. What did he tell you?
Yeah, I spoke with Mitchell Proner of Proner & Proner, and basically what he told me is they assembled a team of international lawyers, maritime attorneys. The lawsuit was filed yesterday in state court in Miami, not as a class action. They're hoping to keep jurisdiction in Miami. But Gary, you know, when you take a cruise, you take a contract of passage, and there's a lot of fine print in that document. This particular document says if Costa did not dock in the United States, all jurisdiction is Italy. They're fighting hard to keep it in the United States due to the egregious conduct of the crew. And one instance, Avery, listen to this. In Italian, they were telling the passengers, get on the lifeboats. In English, they were saying, go back to your rooms. And that's just one example.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one example of conduct. They're hoping to overcome the limitation of liability and the jurisdictional provisions in the contract.
Yeah. There are, Gary, there are a multitude of both procedural and substantive issues, but to me, what's so compelling here, once they figure out where it's going to be, and I think it will stay in the United States because Carnival owns the ship, is that, number one, Francesco Chatino, the captain, on one hand says, well, I've fallen down and I can't get up. And he fell right into a lifeboat, which is not very credible. Secondly, they got him on tape saying I upped and left. And secondly, and I think more compelling, is that under maritime law, you're supposed to contact the Coast Guard immediately. Costa Crociere, which owns the boat, owns the ship, and the captain admit that no one contacted the Coast Guard for 73 minutes. That's extremely compelling, and it may be effective in getting around the kind of fine print that Richard's talking about.
Avery, let me ask you, why file in state court in Florida and not federal court if the case eventually does come to the United States? What's the benefit to do it in state court?
Mostly because it's easier. I frankly would have chosen a federal forum, but I understand that by trying to convince a state court judge to keep the case based on this Florida-based company, many of the procedures that are required in a federal courtroom will not be required in state court. It's a very smart tactical move. The idea of a class action, which would have only been somewhere between 30 to 150 people, I think was unlikely. I think the plaintiff's lawyers, while we're looking at hyperbole, Gary, they're saying it's worse than the Titanic. 1,500 people died in the Titanic. 16 people died here. A tragic loss of life. I'd like to see it stay in the state courts where the case will be tried.
You know, it's amazing. You talk about the Titanic, and the irony and the coincidence here is, you know, it's been exactly 100 years. It was April 15th, 1912 that the Titanic sank. And by the way, for you baseball fans, 5 days later, Fenway Park opened in Boston. It's the 100th anniversary of Fenway Park. Both things happened in April, though, of 1912. So that's why I think a lot of people compare it to the Titanic, because it's been 100 years.
Gary,
those pictures look the same.
Gary, you got Costa Cruises also. They have corporate offices in Hollywood, Florida. So there's great reasons to bring it in Florida. However, those contract provisions, and Avery thinks it's going to stay in Florida. I'm just not so sure at this point. They have been held enforceable over the years. It's a very tough hurdle for the plaintiffs to overcome those contract provisions.
Well, Avery and Richard,
the insurance company is meeting with the plaintiffs, so that's a good sign for the plaintiffs.
Right.
Gentlemen, we have a lot more to talk about today, so don't go away. Don't go into the Pacific Ocean yet in Hawaii, Richard, because we'll be back in... That's right. We'll be back in 20 minutes. It really is my favorite place in the world, Hawaii. We'll be back in 20 minutes to talk about a place most parents consider safe, but may now think twice about after an appellate court ruling.